Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly discussion series that's hosted by the Chaldean Cultural Center in collaboration with U of M Detroit Center, Unique Voices in Films, and CMN TV. I'm your host, am Nemu, and our guest today is Samantha Ellis. Hello, Samantha.
Hiya. Hi, hello.
She's joining us from London, by the way, so thank you for making the time. So, Samantha grew up in the Iraqi Jewish community in London. She is the author of How to Be a Heroine and Take Courage and Bronte and the Art of Life. Samantha's plays, published by Nick Hearn Books, include Cling to Me Like Ivy, How to Date a Feminist, and I'm Still Burning. She has worked on the screenplays for Paddington Films and freelance for various publications. She is a MacDowell Colony Fellow and chaired the judges for the Jewish Quarterly Wingate Award and is a regular on the Blacklisted podcast. She is currently working on a book about losing, keeping, and sifting Iraqi Jewish language and culture. And that's the topic I'm so interested to learn more about.
Oh, well, thank you.
I have so many questions for you, but to start, so can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing in the Iraqi Jewish community in London and how that has influenced your writing and perspective?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, my father left Baghdad in 1951 with most of the Jews of Iraq, and my mother left quite late. She left in 1971. Really, it was very present for us. They all the grown-ups when I was young spoke the Jewish Arabic dialect or language. It's a big discussion whether it's a dialect or a language. Actually, when I was a very small child, I thought that as soon as I grew up, I would speak that. I thought English was just a language for children. It was completely all over. I grew up really in a community within a community. It was it was where I lived. The food we ate Iraqi Jewish food all the time. At the weekends, we mainly saw Iraqi Jewish friends until I was at school and I had other friends. And had a huge influence on everything I've written, I think, and on my life.
Regarding the language, what do you mean? Are you talking about the Aramaic language or just the?
No, it's a language that the Jews of Iraq spoke and some still speak. It's difficult to give it a name because some people call it Judeo-Baghdadi, some people call it Iraqi Judeo-Arabic or Judeo-Iraqi Arabic. But it has a lot of Aramaic in it because what happened was the Jews, when they were brought to Iraq originally, to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, they were speaking Hebrew, and they came to Babylon, and the lingua franca was Aramaic. So they adopted Aramaic, and they then developed their own variant called Jewish Babylonian Aramaic, which eventually will turn into my language. So that was the language the Babylonian Talmud was written in. And also, do you know about the magic bowls?
No, but I'd
The
love to hear about the magic.
the magic bowls. So I love the magic bowls. So for years, archaeologists in Iraq kept finding these bowls with strange writing on them, going round and round and round in a circle, spiraling in a circle, and sometimes strange drawings. And they were mostly in Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. Some were in other languages, but they were mostly in this language. And they just kept finding them, and no one knew what they were. At first, they threw a lot of them away. They thought they was just kind of crockery or something. And then they realized they might be incantation bowls, and a lot of them were to ward off demons. And they're written, they're very intimate. It's sort of it's to ward off curses and demons. It's literally like one person writing to another person, I'm inscribing on this bowl to ward off this very specific demon that is haunting you in your very specific house in a specific way. So very sort of kitchen magic almost. And they're all written in and scholars now believe often written by women. So they're all written in a language. So then, of course, when the Persians come, the language takes on a lot of Persian, a lot of Farsi, and then later, when the Arab conquest comes, they switch to Arabic. But what happened was the Jews never really lost the Aramaic base, so it's still got a lot of Aramaic in it, a lot of constructions, a lot of words, and it still feels quite sort of ancient in a way that other Iraqi languages might have modernized, we've often, I don't know what this says about us, but we've often clung on to the constructions.
This is
So,
so interesting. This is why I love to do these interviews. I'm
mm,
always like learning something new, and I didn't know. I thought they were just, for the most part, we're speaking Aramaic, but then that you're saying that there's this certain dialect that is almost, there's also, some people call it even a language, and some people call it a dialect. And I'm gonna look more into that. So yeah, interesting.
um, Yeah, I mean, there's at the moment there's in Oxford there's the Oxford School of Rare Jewish Languages is doing a course in it, which I'm doing actually because I don't speak it. I'm not fluent. I can understand, but I can't speak. And that's been really interesting because it's become a sort of hub for bringing a lot of people together who wanted to speak it, whether academics or just people with an interest or people like me. So
And so, growing up, as a Iraqi with the Iraqi Jewish background. By the way, have you ever been to Iraq or no?
No, I kept wanting to go. I kept hoping it would become a safer place to be, but it's been a criminal offence for a very long time to have any connection with Israel. And my father, because he went in the airlift in 1951, he went to Israel, like most of Iraq's Jews. So, I have a connection with Israel.
I
Much of
see.
my family.
You just reminded me of something. So when I went to Israel, when I visited, I don't even remember the year. It was in the mid 1990s.
Yeah,
So because they knew that I'm of Iraqi background, I mean, I'm a
yeah,
U.S. citizen, but they said,
yeah.
there was the question, an automatic question, do you want us to stamp your passport or not? Because they knew that if they stamp the passport, then I can't go into Iraq.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. No. Well, but I
I
mean,
just
it's now.
remember, I know things have changed. I don't know the rules right
Yeah.
now, but at that time, so I said, no, don't stamp it because I was,
No, I mean, now it's worse. It's in 2021, they made it a death penalty offense to have an association with Israel, in Iraq. So, I mean, I wouldn't, I can't go to Iraq now, sadly. I'm not sure whether that will change, but
okay, yeah, that's so unfortunate given the rich history that your community has
yeah,
had in Iraq. And so how has that influenced your writing and what you wrote over the years? Tell us about
yeah.
that, and like with regards to how you chose your first book. It seems like you're writing more about your personal experiences later. It seems like you're writing other things until you got to that point. So tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that journey.
I think I found it quite hard to write about because I think it wasn't always very clear how to do it. I think people didn't really understand what it meant to be Iraqi Jewish. I think a lot of people found it confusing, and so you always had to do a lot. I felt I always had to do a lot of explaining, and I wasn't sure how to. It just took a lot of space to explain it, and then to get to what you wanted to do. So it took me a while, but I think I've always written with a sense of otherness, being on the margins, not in the center, and a sense of kind of complex, nuanced identities that are difficult to pigeonhole. So whatever I've written has had that in it.
And so let's start with some of your early writings. How you came across, or what was the experience of writing, How to Be a Heroine, and that explores the female literary characters that have inspired you. And then later
Yeah.
you published Take Courage and Bronte and Art of Life. So it seems like there's a focus on the feminine, and then
Yes.
there's a focus, on obviously on art, and just, from female perspective. And do you find that that is part of, maybe comes from your lineage? I know that at some point in my life, as I started to look into my heritage, I found that there was incredible women that had, that my ancestors had a different story than I thought. And so my
Mm,
perspective started kind of shifting towards their accomplishments and who they were, and kind of like giving a voice from that perspective. I don't know, if that was your experience, but it just, I like that you were using those viewpoints. And so what led you to write about these stories?
well, my first book, I'd written a lot of plays and before, but the first book had to be a heroine. Yeah, like as you said, it was a sort of feminist journey, and really it was about looking back at the books I read when I was younger, um, to, to see the heroines that had shaped me, the fictional heroines that had shaped me, and just to re-engage with them and just look at them again as a grown-up. And actually part of that journey was that I'd been running away from what my community wanted for me or my family wanted for me. It was I'd sort of been looking elsewhere for role models, and at the end of the book I really come back to my family, my community, the strong women I grew up with, the storytellers I grew up with. You know, I think my family are all brilliant storytellers. You know, I think people who've had to make great journeys and explain themselves through their lives often become very good storytellers. And so really the journey of that book was coming back to that. And then my second book was a biography of Anne Bronte, because I really felt that she'd been ignored and she was an underdog. And I think something about this ignored stories was very powerful for me. I always want to retell them. I want to refine them. And this, at the moment now, as we said, I'm working on a book that I do feel that the story of the Iraqi Jewish community, perhaps like the story of your community, you know, is untold, or it is told. I mean, you've had some wonderful Iraqi Jewish interviewees on here already, you know, and these stories are being told, but it's taking quite a long time for them to kind of reach the surface. And I feel, you know, I sort of want to be part of that movement, to, you know, to tell these stories. Um,
It's a newer narrative. Like, I think at some point we realized that we have to. I too was influenced mostly by Western writers that
yeah.
by wonderful stories. I mean, I loved the British storytelling, like Henry James and Washington Square. I remember when I uh, read that, I realized later that because I come from Iraq and
Mm,
we had a lot of the British education system, and
mm,
for me, Europe, including of course London and England, is a middle ground between the Middle East and the United States. It has that
yes.
rich history, and then it's modern, but then it's not, as far as the United States, as new as the United States. So I always felt something towards that. But I was influenced a lot of the Western literature. But
Yeah.
then as I got older, same is I thought, well, what about my stories? What about
Yeah.
our women? And almost everybody has had this feeling of not wanting, for me, like not wanting to be who they originally were. Like, what is it to be Chaldean? What you kind of want to even distance yourself from that. Then you start realizing the stories and the oppression, and how some of these feelings, I think, come from the viewpoints that you grew up with, as ancestral wounds
Mm,
that we grew up with, that we're trying to untie through these stories. So I'm always so excited, especially for women, to have this. Now they're realizing like our stories are so important, and to share that,
mm.
especially from that perspective. And I know that you're working on a title right now, that,
Yes.
like, yeah, it's called Chopping Onions on My Heart. Is that
Yes,
correct?
it's this Iraqi Jewish phrase, and I'm going to mispronounce it, but it's Yidrum Basal al Rasifadi. It's you're chopping onions actually on the top of my heart. It's very melodramatic. I suppose it's the equivalent of rubbing salt in the wound. And I just really like this phrase. This book started a really long time ago. I've been working on it for ages. When I had my son, who's now 7, I started realizing I want to. I started really thinking about what can I pass on of the culture, of the heritage, of the language, and he was 2.5 or something. I was in a playground, and I was chatting to this other mum, and her child was bilingual in French and English, and I said, "Oh, I was bilingual. I was really hoping my son would be, but." Um, and you know, she said, "Well, why isn't he?" Essentially, we sort of started having this conversation, and I said, because my language is dead. And I mean, I sort of freaked out after I'd said it, because although I knew, I mean, it's not dead, it's dying, it's going extinct, but I've known my whole life that there's a ticking clock on the language that we speak at home, because it it there's only 3 Jews left in Iraq. The diaspora is spread all over the world. Most of the Jews left in 1951, so it's even unusual to be my age and have parents who left. It's mostly grandchildren and great grandchildren of the people who left now, and you know, I knew it was going, but something about saying this in a playground, you know, over the sort of head of my small child, just hit me, and I suddenly thought, I can't let it die, or at least I need to know more about it, and what we're losing, and what we're keeping as well, because I think a lot of these stories focus on the loss and almost wallow in it sometimes. And actually, what are we keeping? What are we holding on to? There's so much that we can be saving, passing on, communicating, telling stories, sharing recipes, you know, singing the songs. All of this stuff is really important to be doing, rather than just being sad about what we cannot hang on to. So that's the start. That was the start of the book, but it took me quite a long time to to actually get started writing it.
Yeah, I like what you just said, that, doing something about it, what starts it starts the healing. Uh,
Yes.
because when you live in a period sometimes of frustration, once
Mm,
you know the truth of what's going on, and there's two things you can do about it: either dwell in the sadness,
mm,
or do something. And whatever that something is, or whatever happens about it, I don't know. I feel the same way. Like, I started studying Aramaic, even
yes.
though I know it fluently because of my mom. My mom still spoke at our families and everything,
Yeah.
but not on a writing basis, And
Yeah.
I think part of studying it, I realized, is it's regardless of what it's going to do for others or the community, it's doing something for me, from connecting me to my heritage somehow. And I
Mm,
think everybody will have their own way to
of course.
connect. I want to say something about the three Jews that are left in Iraq. I know
Mm,
at one point I tried to get their names. I wanted to reach out and maybe interview them, and their names can't even be for safety purposes. They can't even be
no.
shared. That was so sad that
Mm.
we can't capture their stories because they can't reveal themselves.
I mean, in I can't remember which year, but WikiLeaks exposed all their names and addresses at one point, and it put them in danger. And I think they were sort of 6 or 7 of them at that point, and I think 1 or 2 of them after that, having stayed through everything, left. You know, and I mean that made me really sad that. You know, I agree. But there was a community up until the early 70s. I mean, I think because most people left in 51, we sort of forget that actually Jews were present in Baghdad in small numbers, but, you know, a few thousand, up until, you know, right through the 60s, you know. So it's not that long ago, you know, that there was a community.
And what is the Jewish community like in London?
It's
Are they
very.
active or
Yes, I'd say so. I mean, yeah, definitely. And you know, it's very vibrant. It's, you know, there are, yes, it's a very nice community. I'd say very warm, very supportive. You know,
I mean,
yeah,
like, do they have, like, for instance, in our case, so even though the Chaldeans, most of them came to the United States, but they seem to have
mm,
gravitated towards Michigan, which is where I live and where the
yes,
Chaldean Cultural Center is. And this is where our museum is. Most of our
mm,
organizations, and this is like our kind of little hub here in the United States.
mm,
We currently have the largest population of Chaldeans in the world here in Michigan.
wow.
Yeah, and so we're active for many reasons, and then California has the second largest population.
Mm.
So in your case, would you say, do you have a large a population in comparison to others? I'm not even sure really, like, where is the largest Iraqi Jewish
It's
population?
Israel, definitely, because that's where
Oh,
most
of
that's
course.
where the mass airlift was in 1951
Okay.
of. I think it's 120,000 Jews left in it may yeah around that in 1951. So them and their descendants are all. I mean, some of them didn't
I
stay in
heard
Israel, but many of them
And
did.
then I heard that there's in Toronto, that there's a large
Yes,
population that is
and Montreal,
Montreal.
New York, Sydney as well. I think London. Those are the main ones. I think.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll connect to all of them over time.
Yeah.
We'll be able to connect to all of them. Yeah. So, and so right now, do you have an an idea of possibly when people should look for it?
It will be spring next year, I think. So I'm still just working on it.
Okay,
But
so we'll announce it. Yeah, once it comes
thank
out, we'll
you.
announce it.
Thank you so
What
much. Yeah.
what other projects do you foresee yourself working on, or is there anything else that you're currently doing?
At the moment, no. At the moment, mainly I'm doing this. It's been quite a project because it's not just the language. Once I started with the language, and then I was really looking at the recipes, and then I was looking at all sorts of things, the magic bowls, all these things that that make up the culture, the Iraqi Jewish archives, which I know you've covered already. You had a beautiful interview with Carol Basri, the music. So it became quite a big book in the in the end. And
Good. That's
yeah,
good.
I
You're
mean,
including very interesting things, and I really
yeah,
look forward to reading that. By the way, because
thank
this is
you.
it's just I love reading any all different cultures and backgrounds and everything like that. And as I had mentioned to you before the interview started, in our museum we share the story of the Jews in Babylon when Nebuchadnezzar
Yeah,
during their exile, they were in Babylon. And so we have that story in our current museum currently, but
which is
we're
wonderful.
moving.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're moving, and we're going to be expanding that story by including tablets that they discovered in 2015, over 100
mm,
tablets that I was smiling when you were telling me how specific the stuff that they had written in the bowls. Well,
yeah,
these tablets are very specific, and it was about like buying, and it was about trade and like little problems with family problems, whatever, how they took care of it. But one thing that they had discovered from finding these tablets and reading and translating them is that the Jews in Babylon were not treated as slaves. They had the same rights as everybody else, that Nebuchadnezzar had brought them
yeah.
because they were he brought probably the best of the best to help build the empire. And so they were not considered second class citizens. So many of them did it when it was when they had the opportunity to leave. One of the reasons, the ones that stayed, was because Prophet Abraham was from that land, and by
Mm,
then they were like speaking, a lot of them, the Aramaic language. And
yeah.
so yeah, there is a very old history there, and we are including in the new museum replicas of these tablets to
Oh
share,
well.
to expand on the story of the
Yeah.
in Babylon.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think it's really interesting, even within the Jewish writings we already have, that you have, the psalm about weeping by the rivers and being, feeling the exile is a real tragedy for the community, which it was, in many ways. But you also have the prophet Jeremiah wrote a letter to the exiles saying, build houses, plant gardens, have weddings, don't just look back. You're here now, and they, as a community, really did commit. I mean, they were there for thousands of we were there for thousands of years, and part of the a huge part of the diverse culture of Babylon and then Iraq. And I think something I was really interested in was in the 1920s and 30s when, the country was becoming a new country, and everyone was sort of, there was really, people were coming together to make this new country of Iraq. And Jews were really much part of that. They were writing sort of love letters to the new country in Arabic. They were, they my great great grandfather was an MP, for example. I mean, they were part of it. It was it was it was not, we were not other. I mean, we were one of many others, maybe, perhaps is a good way of thinking about it, or as far as I can see, we contributed, and I find that very, very moving, but also very sad now, to be unable to go there, to feel that the default, when someone says Iraqi, they don't maybe think of someone Jewish, or maybe not of your community either. That's not what they think of, and yet for many generations that was what we were. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I often had felt sad. I did go to Iraq in 2000, so I did visit
mm,
it. but some of the things that I had seen, because it was under sanctions and it had been really affected by the Gulf War. So it really saddened me. And afterwards, part of me not going back, well, there was several reasons, including like I started a family and wanted to raise my kids,
Mm.
but there was that sadness there. And then what happened with the Christians and the Yazidis in
Yes.
2014. But in my case, I think at least now, from what I hear from people visiting, they said, oh, things have really changed. They've really improved. So I
Mm.
think, okay, great. There is the idea that I can go back. So I never really, I was already saddened by the idea that I can't go back as easily, but to think that you can't go back at all, that's another.
Currently, no. I mean, no. We'll see.
And that could exactly. I like what you just said. We'll see. There
Yeah.
is that possibility. We had the Iraqi Prime Minister visit us recently.
Wow.
Wonderful visit. Yeah, he visited the museum, and I had the honor of giving him a tour. And I have to tell you, I really felt I was very impressed by his speech. I was
Mm.
by his overall aura, actually, by his energy. He was incredibly respectful, felt like such an was very open-minded in so many different ways, secular. And I just thought that, you know, maybe not today or tomorrow, but his essence gave this hope that there could be that day where
Yeah.
everybody from different backgrounds can feel welcomed into their birthland, or even from any parts of the world. Like Iraq,
Mm.
the history of Iraq, one thing that everybody loves and has feels connected to the history of Iraq is the history. That
Yes.
history, religion aside, we
Yeah.
all share that love for that history, Iraqis,
Sure.
whether we're Muslim, Jewish, Christians. And so, one day I hope that everybody, the whole world, can kind of visit and enjoy that visit.
Yeah.
And given what you've wrote and your experience, what advice would you give writers who are of minority backgrounds feeling like they want to break in or share these stories? Because sometimes, because of the political situation, we sometimes
Yeah.
find it difficult. Or like in my case, I know when I was younger, I was always encouraged to write stereotypical stories, which thank God I
Yeah.
didn't fall into that trap. But I was always tempted, like, to be told, like, oh, you can be a bestseller if you wrote this about
Mm.
honor killing, about this, all the things that it wasn't part of who my story was. And
Yeah.
so what advice would you give new authors, or even writers who want to write about their heritage and truthfully and authentically write about it?
I mean, I think it takes a long time to get to that point yourself, and but I think it's really important. I think when these stories have been marginalized or ignored or erased, I mean, there has been a huge erasure of the Iraqi Jewish story, and of other communities in Iraq. I think it's really important to try and tell stories about it, to just to say what happened. And I think that actually it can be almost an act of creative resistance to the erasure. I think it's really important, and that's been something that I felt really empowered by. Um,
Creative resistance.
yeah,
Wow.
maybe.
Yeah, no, I like that, because it's producing, it's creating something rather than destroying. Creative resistance. I think that's really, just by telling our stories, I think that's a great way to bring awareness. Also, if you
Yes.
want to bring awareness or whatever, you can really do it creatively. I love that. So we only have like a minute and a half left, and I just, any last words that you want to share with our audience who are listening? All right.
I just think what you're doing is so wonderful, and thank you so much for having me. And I think these conversations across different cultures, from Iraq, and about erasure and about these stories is just are so important. So thank you very, very much, and I hope to visit your museum
Oh, and
at some
you're
time.
welcome. Yes, please tell me. You'll definitely be invited to my house for an Iraq. But
Oh
actually,
wow, okay, I'm definitely coming.
yes, you definitely will. By the way, like the area, the city I live in is called, it's nicknamed Little Baghdad, because
Wow,
every
okay.
single corner, we have Ishtar restaurant here, we have Ishtar sweets, we have
Oh,
Like,
wow.
yeah,
Okay.
it's really lovely. I ended up writing a memoir. Your book reminds me of, I wrote a memoir called Little Baghdad that highlights it, just the community here and our history and the language and other things. So I love what you're doing. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're
Oh,
doing. Yes,
and you. Such a
and I
pleasure.
look
Thank
forward
you.
to you visiting Michigan. Okay.
I hope so. I'd love to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Right.
everyone, for watching, and have a wonderful day. Bye.